Hey everyone. This time we read Sid Meier's Memoir. So I learned a lot of stuff from this book, but probably the biggest thing that I learned was how many games Sid Meier actually made prior to Civilization. So while I found the flight simulators really interesting, and flight simulators is kind of how Sid met his business partner, Bill Seeley, they wasn't as important to me as two other games that he talks about. Both of them are submarine simulators, and because I spent 5 years in the Navy on a submarine, those were the two that kind of stood out for me. One of them was a licensed tie-in with a Tom Clancy book, but the one we're going to look at is Silent Service. I'm going to look at the NES version because that's the one that I have readily available. So the simulation is of a World War II diesel-powered submarine, and I think they do a really cool job with it. Well, it's not totally accurate because I don't think it captures the crushing isolation and just the really annoying parts of being on a submarine. It still does a really great job of, simulating the combat, which is really what you want from one of these games. And it leads to a really fun story where Steely wanted there to be a deck gun on the submarines, which actually makes a lot of sense for a diesel submarine. They did have deck guns on them, so it wouldn't have been too crazy. Sid says that he didn't want that on there, but in the end, Steely kind of prevailed. And he talks about how Steely was kind of, demoing the game, and they came to a point where he ran out of torpedoes and he needed to use the deck gun in order to win, and all the executives that were there while he was playing the game are celebrating him, and of course Sid's telling this like a third-hand account, which kind of makes sense. But this is something that I ran into a few times where I'm trying to blow up one of the enemy ships, and I would run out of torpedoes. It happened to me when I was playing this, and it happened to me when I rented the game. Yeah, I was the weird kid who rented Silent Service growing up because I didn't really know what it was. But it's just a really interesting game, and it kind of shows what, Sid would learn with other games. So throughout this book, Sid ties in a lot of the games that he worked with personal stories. And I really like the way that he does it too, because some of them go into what inspired him, some go into the hobbies that he has or the hobbies that he picked up throughout his career. And it's just really cool to read about those, just because you can kind of see how it relates to the game he was working on, and as you read you can see, okay, this is how it inspired future games that he was going to work on. And he calls out a lot of those in the book, which is really awesome. It just kind of seems like he was always thinking and never really threw anything away. So this approach gives you a lot of insight into Sid's creative process, which again is something really awesome that you just really want from books like this. So when I think of Sid Meier, I think about the Civilization series. And I think about just how that stood out from all of the other games that I played at the time. But what I didn't know was there was a game that he made prior to it called Pirates. And he mentions once he gets to Civilization how he took things from Pirates and brought it into Civilization. And as you read this book, you find out he's taken a lot of ideas, especially from his earlier games, and added those into the newer ones, or at least modified them so that they would fit into the newer game. And in fact, when he goes to talk about Pirates, he calls it an adventure game. He doesn't necessarily call it a simulation or anything like that. And he goes into talking about the text adventure games for just a little bit. And it's one thing I never thought about when I was playing Pirates. It's just kind of a cool way to describe it as being an adventure game. I think of it more as a sandbox game, but let's check out that game and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about what Sid says. I would say there are a lot of different genres going on in Pirates. It is an adventure game, it's a simulation game, it's part role-playing. There's just so much happening in here that, it's just got something for everybody. And he talks a little bit about how he was inspired by several of the pirate adventures that he And it's kind of cool. You can see what he's talking about because, you know, the hero doesn't die in it. You're always kind of like saving people. You're doing a lot of the things that a hero would do in an adventure movie. You can get married, you can do, you know, a whole bunch of other things. On top of that, you can see kind of where he picks some things up for Civilization. The fact that you can just kind of do anything, and there's also really like an open-ended feel to the game. You decide in this game when you want it to be over. You can just go ahead and retire, or you can keep going on and you can keep trying to play. As you get older in this game, your stats diminish, because as you get older as a person, you can't do the same things you did when you were younger. But I think that ability and that mode to actually have your character retire speaks a lot to what he did with Civilization. Because at any time in that, you can just, you know, turn off and start over, or you can go for one of the multiple win conditions. So as you read this, you kind of get the feeling he's constantly building on all of the older ideas, like I said. And he's also taking ideas from other games and trying to modify them to either perfect what was in the older games or to turn them into something new. And he talks about how, you know, there's a fine line between outright theft and actually like using an existing idea and making something brand new out of it. I really like that the discussion he has about it, because it speaks a lot to the video game industry, where you have clones of certain games, but you kind of start to wonder how close it was to the original, and if there's something in that clone that kind of does something a little bit differently and makes it just a little bit better than the original. It was a really thought-provoking kind of discussion that he had, and I just really kind of got my mind working when I read it. During this, Sid talks about how he was a designer's designer and how he kind of got described that way in the press. And he goes into how he made games that he wanted to play. He didn't necessarily make games that were going to be, you know, mainstream, or at least were thought as mainstream at the time. And this is kind of a cool thing to think about, because even in like the late 80s, early 90s, genres really weren't totally set in stone yet. So when games like Pirates and Civilization came along, they kind of broke the mold of what the existing games were, because they were kind of like these grand sweeping strategy adventure simulation games. Going into that, he talks a little bit about kind of making games fun, and it goes into some discussions that I've seen in other books about how you program something to be fun. And I think in this, Sid gets kind of the closest to that, where he's talking about the dinosaur game and how the dinosaur game was not released, because he went through prototype after prototype trying to find like the right mix to make this game kind of like a fun game. He talks about how it went through a version that was like Civilization. He talks about how it went through kind of like a card game, and how it went through something that was like an Age of Empires game, that sort of thing. And each time he did this, he couldn't find like that right balance, kind of that sweet spot where you can say, this is a fun game to play. Even looking at the dinosaur game, you can see how he was pulling things from older games. He worked on a licensed title for Magic the Gathering, and so he tried at the very end to say, okay, maybe the dinosaur game should be a card game. And he just kept on saying, you know, we tried it, and it just didn't work out. And that's something really important that he gets at with that, by saying, you know, just because something doesn't work out now, it doesn't mean you should just give up on it. It means you should keep trying and keep plugging away at it. So I talked about how Sid used some of his life experiences when he was creating games. And the one that really stood out for me when he was talking about this was Railroad Tycoon. Now, Railroad Tycoon came from Sid's experiences in Switzerland when he was sent there when he was younger. He gets into this later in the book, which it leads into my favorite chapter in the book, but it's not specifically about Railroad Tycoon at the moment. Now, when he was in Switzerland, he kind of became fascinated with the trains there, and he got like this big, thick book of like all the train schedules. And he just kind of became enamored with, trains and everything like that. So he kind of kept that sort of bouncing around in his head later on in his life when he was on one of his vacations where he still technically kind of worked. He came up with this prototype for a railroad game. And then over time, like as he and another programmer were working on it, they slowly built out what would eventually be Railroad Tycoon. But you can see how he pulled something from his past again and sort of tried to make it into something that he found fun, like a hobby or an interest that he had when he was younger. He turned that into a game eventually when he became older. I mentioned my favorite chapter in the book just a little bit ago, and that's when he starts talking about his family. This one, I can't remember if it had anything to do with the game or not, but it's really irrelevant because he goes more into the relationships he has with his family members, and one particular he goes into with his sister, who unfortunately passed away when he was younger. And he talks about how, his trip to Switzerland might have had two meanings. It might have been to expand his horizons and also kind of shield him from what was going on. It's just a really great chapter, and honestly it was the best one in the book for me. So obviously the book has a huge focus on the Civilization series, and let's just go ahead and talk about that. It's a spectacular series of games. Regardless of the entry that you start out with, Civilization just is one of those games that just sucks you in, and you can tell that there has been a lot of time and effort put forward into just making this a very special game. Sid goes into how the game really has like a new lead programmer for each entry, and he mentions this because it's kind of a way to get like fresh eyes on the series each time. He didn't really want just the same thing over and over again, and he just kind of wants the thing to keep moving forward. He goes into like some of the glitches and the bugs in the game, which I think is really kind of cool that he even bothered to go back and like address that sort of thing. I think probably the funniest one that I didn't know about was Gandhi, when you kind of turn India into a democracy, and Gandhi goes from being, just a regular, like, super peaceful guy to being just this bloodthirsty warlord. He also goes into how Civilization kind of was a weird game from, like, a business standpoint, and how he just never really seemed to get like the corporate support for making these games. Once Bill Steely left MicroProse, it just kind of felt like, Civilization was there, but they didn't really have a whole lot of faith in it for whatever reason. There's a lot more in this book than what I covered, and I could honestly just keep going on and on about it, but I need to cut this short at some point. This is just a fantastic book. For someone like me, growing up when I got Civilization 2, and I didn't know who Sid Meier was or why he was on like the cover of the game that I was buying, and honestly didn't really question it, it was great to read this. It gives you so many insights into like the video game industry. It gives insights into, the way Sid Meier makes games. It's just absolutely spectacular. I would recommend it to everyone. Like, it's just that great of a book. I'm so glad that Sid wrote it, and I'm even more glad that I had a chance to read it. So that's going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everyone.